June 4th, 1944. The largest invasion force ever assembled in human history is sitting in the English Channel. Nearly 200,000 men, 5,000 ships, 12,000 aircraft. Everything ready, everything planned, 2 years of preparation. All of it staked on one moment. And then, someone called it off. Not Hitler, not the Germans. The man who canceled D-Day was Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces himself. And almost nobody talks about what happened in the 24 hours that followed, because what Eisenhower did next, alone, in a room, at 3 in the morning, is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire history of the Second World War. This is the decision that didn't make the history books. The night the war almost ended differently, forever. To understand what was at stake that night, you have to understand what D-Day actually was. By the summer of 1944, the war in Europe had been grinding for nearly 5 years. The Soviet Union had already lost somewhere between 20 and 27 million people. Western Europe was still under Nazi occupation. Every attempt to crack Hitler's Atlantic Wall, the fortified coastline stretching from Norway to the southern tip of France, had either failed, stalled, or bled out. The Allies needed a foothold, a real one, a beach they could pour men and material through like a faucet until the weight of it simply crushed the German war machine. That beach was Normandy. Operation Overlord, the code name for the invasion, had been in planning since 1943. The logistics alone were staggering. Artificial harbors were built in secret. Fake armies were created to confuse German intelligence. A fictional general named Fusage, supposedly commanded by George Patton, was invented entirely to make the Germans think the invasion was coming somewhere else. The deception operation was called Bodyguard, and it worked almost perfectly. By June 1944, Hitler genuinely believed the main invasion would land at Pays de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, 400 miles northeast of the actual target. His best panzer divisions were positioned there, waiting for an attack that was never coming. But all of that, the fake armies, the misdirection, the years of buildup, it meant nothing if the invasion itself couldn't launch. And in the first week of June 1944, the English Channel had other ideas. The weather over the Channel in early June 1944 was catastrophic, not inconvenient, not rough, catastrophic. Gale force winds, waves surging across the beaches at Normandy, cloud cover so thick that the bombers that were supposed to suppress German defenses before the infantry landed would be flying completely blind. The meteorological window that Allied planners had originally identified, June 5th, had collapsed entirely. And that meant Eisenhower was standing at the edge of a cliff. Postpone or go. It sounds simple until you understand what postponing actually meant. The 200,000 soldiers already loaded onto ships in the Channel couldn't just wait. Men crammed into landing craft in rolling seas, get seasick, exhausted, mentally broken. Some of those ships had already been out there for days. The longer they sat, the less effective the invasion force would be when it finally hit the beach. And there was something far more dangerous. The longer the Armada sat visible in the Channel, the higher the probability that German reconnaissance would spot it, that a U-boat would stumble into it, that radio traffic would spike in ways that German signals intelligence, SIGINT, couldn't ignore. The entire deception operation, Bodyguard, everything built over years, could unravel in 48 hours of bad weather. The window wasn't just military, it was astrological. The invasion required specific tidal conditions. Low tide at dawn, so landing craft wouldn't be impaled on the steel obstacles the Germans had planted on the beaches. A full moon the night before, so paratroopers could navigate inland. Those conditions wouldn't align again for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and nobody, not Eisenhower, not Churchill, not Roosevelt, was certain the secret could hold that long. On the morning of June 4th, Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, a young Royal Air Force officer named Group Captain James Stagg, walked into the briefing room at Southwick House, a Georgian mansion outside Portsmouth that had become Allied headquarters, and delivered news that nobody wanted to hear. June 5th was out. Completely. The storm hadn't broken. If anything, it was getting worse. Eisenhower went around the room. He asked every senior commander in that room the same question. Go or wait? Admiral Bertram Ramsay, naval commander. The ships cannot operate in this weather. Bernard Montgomery, ground forces commander. We should wait. Air Marshal Trafford. Lee Mallory. The air support will be useless in these conditions. One by one. And then silence. Eisenhower sat with it. The room, according to those who were there, was almost completely quiet. And then he made the call that sent 200,000 men back to port. Operation Overlord, June 5th, was canceled. Now the generals cleared out. The staff officers dispersed. The commanders went to manage the chaos of turning a 200,000-man invasion fleet around in a storm. And Eisenhower was alone. What happened in that room over the next 12 hours has been documented only in fragments, in diary entries, in letters he wrote but never intended anyone to read. Because what Eisenhower did that night, at approximately 3 in the morning, tells you more about what leadership actually costs than any speech or monument ever could. At some point in the early hours of June 5, 1944, Dwight D. Eisenhower took a small notepad from his desk and began to write. It wasn't an order. It wasn't a battle plan. It was a letter accepting personal responsibility for the complete failure of the Normandy invasion. He wrote it before he gave the order to go. While the window Stagg had promised, a narrow, uncertain, brutally short gap in the storm, was still just a prediction, a guess, a probability. Because Stagg had come back. In the early hours of June 5th, Stagg had detected something in the weather data that gave him enough to work with. A brief clearing, maybe 36 hours, maybe less, of tolerable conditions. Winds dropping. Cloud cover lifting enough for some air support. Not perfect, not even close to ideal, but possibly enough. The decision Eisenhower made next, alone, at 3 in the morning, in a room with the weight of civilization literally resting on his shoulders, was this: go June 6th, and the letter he had already written, the one that accepted complete personal failure. He folded it up and put it in his pocket. They found it decades later, slightly crumpled, written in pencil, addressed to no one in particular and everyone at once. It read, "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." He signed it, he folded it, and he put it in his pocket. Then he went and ordered 200,000 men to storm the beaches of Normandy. At 6:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the first wave of Allied troops hit the beaches, on Utah, on Gold, on Juneau, on Sword, and on Omaha, the beach that almost broke everything. The bombing runs had missed. The amphibious tanks, which were supposed to provide cover for the infantry, sank in the waves. The current had pushed landing craft off course. Men came down the ramps of their boats into water over their heads, drowning before they ever fired a shot. In the first hour at Omaha Beach, American casualties were so catastrophic that General Omar Bradley, watching from a command ship offshore, seriously considered abandoning the beach entirely. But they didn't stop. Sergeants and corporals, whose names you will never find in the history books, took command when their officers were killed and kept moving. Small groups of men, soaked and bleeding and terrified, found paths up the cliffs and started destroying German gun positions one at a time. By nightfall on June 6, 1944, the Allies held all 5 beaches. The foothold existed, and the liberation of Western Europe, which would cost another 11 months and hundreds of thousands more lives, had begun. Here's what the history books leave out. If the weather window on June 5th hadn't appeared, the next viable invasion window was June 19th. On June 19, 1944, the English Channel was struck by the worst storm in 40 years. A storm so violent, it completely destroyed one of the 2 artificial harbors the Allies had secretly constructed. It scattered ships. It would have torn apart an invasion fleet still in transit. If Eisenhower had waited, if he hadn't trusted Stagg's prediction, if he hadn't made that call at 3 in the morning, when everything was uncertain and nothing was guaranteed. The invasion fleet would have hit that storm in the open water. History doesn't like to calculate what might have happened next, but the Soviet Union was already exhausted. Hitler's 5-2 rocket program was accelerating. The German defenses in France, given 2 more weeks to prepare, might have held long enough to change everything. The margin between the history we know and the history we almost got was approximately 14 days. And one man's decision, in a room, at 3 in the morning, alone. That folded note Eisenhower wrote, the failure letter he never needed to send, is now preserved in the Eisenhower Presidential Library in Abilene, Kansas. It still has the crease marks from where he folded it and put it in his pocket. And what strikes most people who see it, what stops them, is not what it says, it's what it represents. A man who was about to change the course of human history sat down in the dark and prepared, quietly and without witnesses, for the possibility that he had just ended it instead. That is the weight that real decisions carry. That is what history never shows you. The room before the glory. The silence before the order. The note written in pencil by a man who had no guarantee of anything, except that doing nothing was not an option. The beaches are quiet now, green and peaceful and almost beautiful if you don't know what happened there. But the tide still comes in exactly the way it did on June 6, 1944. And somewhere in the archives, folded in pencil, is the failure letter of the man who made sure the tide came in for the right side. History remembers Normandy. Very few remember the night before it. Now you do.